Welcome to Inside Games Daily, the only gaming news show brave enough to cut out the middleman and avoid paying ourselves a $250 million bonus.
That's right. We don't have to get acquired and then have somebody delay our episodes just to get out of paying us money. We just won't pay ourselves in the first place.
Very, very smart. Gamers are calling for a full boycott of Subnautica 2 after a series of extremely suspicious moves from the game's new publisher, Krafton, Inc.
Yeah, basically it looks like Krafton supplanted Subnautica developer Unknown Worlds' leadership team and delayed an early access ready game to avoid paying the studio and the studio's entire staff a very hefty $250 million bonus.
So this story's been developing over the last few days, recently bolstered by a report from none other than Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, who cites anonymous sources involved with more specific details.
Yeah, it really does provide a little more clarity to the issue, which is, it's clear in one way, but it's kind of confusing in another. Anyway, alarm bells started ringing last week when the previous leadership of Subnautica developers Unknown Worlds were just forced out of the company.
Yeah, this was a lot of people were on Reddit were super worried about this because this clearly was a herald of something coming. Specifically, Unknown Worlds founders Max McGuire and Charlie Cleveland, plus previous CEO Ted Gill, were all abruptly removed from their positions.
Yeah, and they've been there for a while. McGuire and Cleveland founded Unknown Worlds 24 years ago in San Francisco. They actually made the Half-Life mod Natural Selection, and that's where that studio came from. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
With Gill later joining the company almost 7 years ago and stepping into the CEO role in 2024.
Striking Distance CEO Steve Papoutsis is assuming the CEO role now. Krafton also owns Striking Distance, just for your information.
Yeah, Striking Distance made Callisto Protocol and Redacted.
Yes.
At the time of these abrupt firings or dismissals or whatever word you want to use, Krafton, who actually acquired the studio back in 2021, they didn't really address that issue directly in a statement.
Krafton CEO C.H. Kim said, quote, "There's nothing more important than the gamer experience. Given the anticipation around Subnautica 2, we owe our players nothing less than the best possible game as soon as possible. We are thrilled Steve is joining us in our shared commitment at Krafton and Unknown Worlds to deliver Subnautica 2 as a more complete and satisfying entry in the series, one that truly lives up to player expectations." Lawrence, they just want to make a good game.
Yeah, that's all they want.
That's it.
It's just that simple. We just want everyone to have the best game possible. Unfortunately, that characterization of the game's lacking quality or being unready to ship, that conflicts with a post from Unknown Worlds founder Charlie Cleveland, who called these events quite a shock. Cleveland went on to say, quote, "We know the game is ready for early access release, and we know you're ready to play it. And while we thought this was going to be our decision to make, at least for now, that decision is in Krafton's hands. And after all these years, to find that I'm no longer able to work at the company I started stings."
So this sounds very surprising to them, not something they were expecting, which is, again, not good. The leadership change accompanied a shift in release schedule for the game as well. Unknown Worlds originally intended to launch Subnautica 2 in early access in 2025, but now the game has been delayed into 2026, Lawrence. That's weird.
That is weird. Yes, extra suspicious when coupled with the fact that Unknown Worlds was eligible for a $250 million bonus if they hit certain revenue targets by the end of 2025. And now with Subnautica 2 delayed, that's very unlikely to happen.
Aha! There it is. There's the aha moment. Okay. Bloomberg reports that Unknown Worlds' previous leadership had planned to share this bonus, the $250 million, with the studio's near 100 employees at Unknown Worlds, with individual payouts ranging from 6 to 7 figures. That's huge, a huge bonus.
That's a life-changing amount of money, especially if you've been putting in a lot of work and trying to get something to ship in a particular window because you know that a bonus payment is waiting. So yeah, a lot of vacations getting canceled and a lot of well-earned time off probably not happening now. So far, neither Krafton nor Unknown Worlds' new leadership have addressed the issue of the bonus.
Oh, what a surprise. Bloomberg provides some choice quotes from a company town hall in which Papoutsis reiterated the Krafton line, because Papoutsis was just installed, that the game didn't seem ready for release. He said, quote, "The desire of Krafton is to have the very best version of Subnautica 2 available for its early access. Well, yes, the software that everybody worked on is in a great spot, and it felt like, hey, we should launch this. That wasn't where both parties aligned around."
Regarding the bonuses, Papoutsis asked for patience on the subject before saying the specifics of the acquisition were, quote, "beyond my current understanding at the moment."
I do not believe that at all, by the way. He is the CEO.
You don't think?
I'm pretty sure they either told him a little bit about it or they told him all about it. I don't believe that. He claims that Krafton never told him the adjustments were made to avoid a bonus payout, but they wouldn't really tell him that directly. I think I think they would. And I think they were...
If they trust him, yeah. If they think he's corporate line, but...
Either that, I don't want to speculate too much right now, but either that or he's going to be there for a year or two, be the heat shield, and then gone.
Ah, yeah. The Disney CEO that steps in when they have to cancel everything, and then the beloved one gets to come back and reign. Yeah, I gotcha. Krafton, for their sake, insists that the delay, quote, was not influenced by any contractual or financial considerations in a statement. They just want to make good games, you guys. That's all.
That's it. This seems like a cut and dry issue of a publisher working the angles to screw over developers. But we do have a few lingering questions. So obviously, we think they just didn't want to pay them the bonus. But there's a few important questions here.
Yeah, this is mostly just my brain spinning, trying to think of angles that aren't covered by a very neat narrative in which Krafton's just trying to save $250 million. I mean, on that note, I feel like $250 million seems like an extremely high amount for a bonus, especially if it's based on revenue. That's a shitload of money, especially when the acquisition of the entire studio was $500 million back in 2021.
Wow. It's possible the bonus was part of the $500 million acquisition value. It also seems a little odd to have half of an acquisition conditionally paid out 4 years later, but they could have been really confident in their development team and been like, we can get this game out in 4 years in a sweat.
Yeah, especially when you're on the groundswell of the original Subnautica, and you're selling your company based on the premise that you can make these sort of indie blow-up hits. But then they went on to make a few games that weren't indie blow-up hits. We'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, that arrangement seems a bit strange, but who knows, business gets done in any kind of way. And this is just for the sake of considering every angle. That's it. It's possible, likely, and I want to say like 95% likely in this situation that a publisher is just burying a game release to avoid paying out a bonus. But there is maybe a very slim sliver of a chance that a developer was kind of trying to squeeze out an early access title before it was ready to hit revenue targets and get a bonus. The problem is now it's like, we don't see the game, so we just have to go off the characterizations of both people. But honestly, from my perspective though, I'm okay with a publisher getting a game out. I mean, early access makes people forgive a lot. And yeah, if it's to get the actual people who make the things, to get them a bonus payment, yes, go ahead and release it early. I don't care. Get your money when you need to get it.
That's true. The first Subnautica was released in early access, obviously, and it wasn't polished. There were a lot of problems with it, and it took a while for that game to actually be in a state where you could just dive in, no pun intended, and play it. So I think that's why the developers here were like, we'll get this $250 million bonus, no sweat, because we released the first Subnautica in not the greatest shape, and everybody loved it. So Subnautica 2 is a hit.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that compounds this is that all the indicators were that Subnautica 2 was kind of geared up to be a hit. It is the second most wish-listed game on Steam. And with traction like that, yeah, the exact quality of an early access game may not matter as much. So Krafton might have been looking at the numbers and been like, oh, this thing's gonna sell. But if we kick it out of this fiscal, we save $250 million. That was another thing I was looking up, is Krafton's market valuation and revenue, because Bruce, you were asking about this. I was curious how much $250 million would actually be to Krafton's financials, and it's fairly significant. In 2024, the revenue was $2 billion, so we're talking about an eighth of their quarterly revenue that they've suddenly erased off the ledger just by booting a game out 6 months or so. So it's very easy to see that, yeah, businessman cut some corners, fired a few people, replaced a couple of executives, and suddenly they got $250 million to play with.
So generally speaking, on the show, we side with the developers, usually. Because the developers are usually the creatives that just want to make a game and make a good game. It's pretty rare that they're the money-grubbing portion of the relationship, right?
Yeah.
Of the publisher and the developer relationship. So I don't want you to think that we don't side with the developer. I absolutely do. I for sure think that this whole thing is not above board. I think that this publisher was like, fuck it, we just push it 6 months down the road. We don't have to pay him $250 million. Like, how easy is that? The first Subnautica released in early access wasn't very good, so we could just say the game's not very good. So simple. And it fucks everybody out of a ton of money. And that's usually what a business does. They want to fuck you out of as much money as they possibly can. The consumer, everybody else that works for them, they are constantly looking for ways to cut corners. So that's what I think happened. I don't necessarily, I don't want to rule out what we were talking about earlier with the developer being like, well, if we push the game out fast, we could just make money. That might have happened, probably not. I'm going to say it's the publisher.
I'm going to say that as well. I could also see, so this is another just like data point. Subnautica did very well. And like we said, Subnautica 2 has a lot of like traction and following, and it's probably going to sell really well once it hits. But Unknown Worlds' previous release, Moonbreaker, was a pretty big flop. The game only attracted 800 concurrent players on Steam when it launched in early access in 2022, and just 250 concurrent players when it hit its 1.0 launch in 2024. So it's possible Krafton is thinking that they acquired a dud, or they got a one-hit wonder or something like that. So they might be stepping in to take more direct control over that studio and thinking that they can't handle another like rushed release, or that maybe Unknown Worlds doesn't know how to navigate early access and they have to like yank the choke chain a little bit. But still, all of that is still like, well, you still agreed to a bonus, and if they hit the revenue, they get the bonus. That's just it. If that's the other thing that gets me is like Krafton was the one that architected this deal, and if the bonus is based on revenue, it's usually unlikely that a company will agree to a bonus that is more than the revenue they would have taken in the first place. So it's strange to me even on a business level that even if they had to pay the $250 million out, releasing Subnautica 2 in early access should bring in more revenue than that. So if they're just trying to like cut the corners on this fiscal year, it still feels like it would be better business to just launch the game and get the money. But who knows, man? It could be that. It could just be some executive at Krafton found a way to like save $250 million and hang that hat on his rack, feather in his cap, I guess. I'm assuming because executive bullshit, man. It's gendered most of the time. So I tend to overcomplicate and overthink things because I like to imagine all the possible angles, but it's really hard to construct a narrative in which Krafton isn't just bilking a bunch of developers out of the money that they earned at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I also should talk about Subnautica Below Zero. Below Zero was also a pretty major success, and again, yet another game that I think some people thought should have been DLC for Subnautica. But Below Zero still released, and people played it and really enjoyed it, and it's got almost 100,000 reviews on Steam. So it's like, clearly, Subnautica is their cash cow, and I can almost guarantee that developers for the last 4 years, when they signed that $250 million bonus contract, said, we have to bust our ass. Like, we're pushing to this bonus. We are pushing, like, I'm serious, like the entire time, pushing to this bonus, because once we get this out, then we will actually be able to make enough money to make another game, or do whatever, or live comfortably. So I'm sure that was their time constraint, was this bonus. So this is a real kick in the nuts from Krafton to Unknown Worlds.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of these agreements, they typically have some kind of clause to try to keep the people involved at the company and working in good faith for a certain amount of time, right? Because otherwise you get the check and then you just come into work for 4 hours a day. Like you have your golden parachute basically, so you don't have to work that hard. So yeah, acquiring a studio and then having revenue goals for 3 or 4 or 5 years out makes a lot of sense. It ensures that your leadership team is going to stay on and work in good faith to try to get products out the door. So yes, and typically that creates a scenario where people sell the company and then they have their retirement, banked up on that payout, where they're like, okay, I got my payout once basically, and I get to scale the studio up. Here's my final push, my final sprint. I get my bonus payment at the end, and then I'm out. Then I've built the company up. I've transferred leadership. I got my deposit. And I'm not even talking about the founders. Like a lot of the developers and everyone at this 100 employee studio, they were probably all working together, pushing towards this goal, and now it's just been yanked out, which is kind of, I'm kind of surprised there haven't been more outcries from the developers at Unknown World, just basically saying, fuck these shit, fuck these guys. They're being remarkably diplomatic about it so far. Even Cleveland's Reddit post, he did a very long and emotional and seemingly very honest post about his feelings and his journey through here. And through all that, he managed to not sound very bitter or upset. He just called the events a shock and kind of left it at that. So I'm kind of surprised at how diplomatic everyone's being. I would be a lot less so if hundreds of thousands of dollars just got yanked out of my potential future.
Lawrence, I think I might be able to tell you why they're being diplomatic. because there's probably a lawsuit brewing. So they can't say anything. They can't do anything, basically dragging a Krafton, because then that can be used against them in whatever lawsuit comes up and whatever settlement probably will land if that happens. Because if it were me, that's the first thing I would do. I would go and talk to a lawyer and be like, wait a second. This game's done. We can put this out now. And they're pushing this 6 months down the road to delay a $250 million bonus. Like, there's got to be some sort of lawsuit brewing.
Excellent consideration. That reminded me, the only other bit that doesn't quite fit in this puzzle is that, as far as we've seen, Krafton hasn't done this before. They haven't really worked the angles this hard. But maybe they have, and they've just been better at keeping it buried. This might be one of the first times they've gotten to this point in an acquisition where they have to pay a contractually obligated bonus, and they don't want to. So maybe they just haven't been in this position yet, and now they're getting there, and we see how they operate their company. So we'll have to see how they manage in the future. I haven't seen the just like brutal business operations out of Krafton. This is like some mid 2000s EA bullshit here.
Yeah, it really is. And it does not bode well for the publisher-developer relationship that we report on quite a lot here on this show. So, but first, like I was talking about earlier, Inside Games truly is on your side, the consumer and developer side, generally speaking. Most of the time, even though we get called corporate shills all the time. There are free Epic games this week, Figment 2 and Skyracket. If you want to download that other launcher, maybe you don't. I do, to get free games, but Yeah, you don't
even have to download the launcher. You can just redeem them and tell yourself someday, when things get really desperate and you need a bunch of free games, when we're all huddled in our Fallout shelters underground, hopefully we can pull those games from Epic. Speaking of being grateful in times of need, we'd like to thank our Inside Games patrons who support the show. And notably, as far as I can tell, none of our patrons have tried to fire us or replace us or delay the release of our episodes. So thank you for that. Specifically, Keto White and Dylan Hiley. Thank you very much. And we assume that $250 million bonus payment's in the mail. That check's probably going to arrive any day now, so thank you very much for that. But if you haven't checked out the Inside Games Patreon, give it a look. That's where we post all of our episodes, so it's actually pretty easy to see everything we do. And also, you get a Lawrence Select weird internet meme every day. So check that out. It's from the deep archives. I got like a weird folder that I've been dumping strange internet memes into for 3 decades now. So it's a war chest of weirdery. So check it out, Inside Games Patreon. And thank you again.